Zara, the young and beautiful princess of the peaceful planet Zendra, had always lived a life of luxury. Her palace was filled with precious jewels, soft silks, and the best food. She had everything a person could want, and more. People loved her, and she loved them back. Zara had no worries, no fears. She was the future ruler of Zendra, destined to lead her people to greatness. But that night, everything changed. It started with a strange noise. Zara, resting in her grand bedroom, heard it first. It was faint at first, a slight hum that she dismissed as the wind or a ship passing by. But soon, the sound grew louder. It was the sound of something much darker. The walls of her room shook as something heavy hit them. The peaceful night air was broken by the roar of engines. Before Zara could react, the door to her room burst open. Two large alien figures stepped into the room. They were tall, with sharp teeth and menacing red eyes that glowed in the dim light. Zara froze in fear. She had heard of raiders before, criminals who went from planet to planet, taking what they wanted, destroying lives. But she never imagined they would come for her. Without a word, the raiders grabbed Zara. They were strong, far stronger than anyone she had ever known. She screamed, hoping her royal guards would hear her, but the raiders were quick. They covered her mouth with a cloth, and everything went dark. When Zara woke up, she was no longer in her bedroom. She found herself in a small, cold cell. The walls were metallic and cold, and the air smelled stale. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized where she was, aboard a ship, and not just any ship, but a ship full of dangerous criminals. She had been kidnapped. Panic filled Zara's mind, but she forced herself to calm down. There had to be a way out. She was a princess, and she was used to getting what she wanted. But no matter how much she searched, the cell was locked tight. There was no way out. Zara sat on the cold floor, tears welling up in her eyes. Her mind raced. What would happen to her? What did they want? She thought of her people back on Zendra, how they would be lost without their princess. Would anyone come to rescue her, or was she truly alone? Hours passed. She had no idea how long it had been. Time seemed to stretch on forever. The ship moved through space, its engines humming as Zara lay on the cold metal floor. She tried to stay strong, but the fear was overwhelming. She missed the warmth of her palace, the comfort of her royal bed. She missed her family, her friends, and most of all, she missed the safety she had always known. Then, something changed. Zara heard footsteps outside her cell. She held her breath, her heart racing. The footsteps stopped, and the door to her cell opened. Two more aliens stood there, their faces covered by dark helmets. They looked at her, their eyes cold and uncaring. Zara backed away from them, but one of the aliens stepped forward and reached for her arm. She pulled back in fear, but it was no use. The alien was too strong. With one swift motion, it grabbed her and dragged her out of the cell. Zara struggled, but her strength was no match for theirs. As she was dragged down the dark hallway, Zara noticed something strange. The ship was quiet now. The usual noise of the crew was gone. The air seemed tense, as if something important was about to happen. She didn't know what it meant, but it made her feel even more uneasy. They stopped at a large open room. Zara's eyes widened as she saw a man standing at the center of the room. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a sharp, serious expression. His uniform was different from the rest of the crew. It was simple, almost like a soldier's outfit. He looked human, and that made Zara pause. Why was a human here? The aliens dropped Zara to the ground before the man. He looked down at her, his eyes scanning her face. For a moment, they just stood there, silently watching each other. Zara didn't know what to expect. The human didn't say anything at first. He simply studied her, his expression unreadable. He didn't seem like the others, the raiders who had taken her. He seemed different. Finally, the man spoke. His voice was calm but firm. "You're safe now," he said. Zara blinked in confusion. Safe. She had been taken from her home, dragged across the galaxy, and now this human was telling her she was safe. The human stepped forward, extending a hand to help her up. Zara hesitated. She had always been taught to trust no one, especially not strangers. But there was something about this man, something about his calm demeanor, that made her feel a little safer. "Who are you?" Zara asked, her voice shaky. "Why are you helping me?" The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her with a mixture of pity and determination. "I'm here to rescue you," he said. Zara's heart skipped a beat. Could this really be her rescue? She had so many questions, but she was too tired to ask them all. For the first time since her kidnapping, she felt a glimmer of hope. The man was here to help her. But would he be able to save her? And if he did, would Zara ever be the same again? The escape plan. Zara couldn't believe her ears. The man had said he was here to rescue her, but she couldn't fully trust him yet. She had been taken from her home, trapped on this cold, dark ship. Everything seemed like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. But as she stood there, staring at the human before her, a small part of her began to hope. The man, who had introduced himself as Jack, looked serious. His eyes were focused, but there was a softness to his expression. He wasn't like the aliens who had captured her. He didn't seem like a killer. In fact, there was something reassuring about him. "Where am I?" Zara asked, her voice still shaky. "Why are they doing this?" Jack glanced at the two aliens who had brought her into the room. They stood by the door, watching her. "You're on their ship," Jack said, his voice low. "They're taking you to a place where they plan to sell you. But that's not going to happen." Zara's heart pounded at the thought of being sold. She had heard stories about beings from other planets who were captured and forced into slavery. The idea that she could be one of them made her stomach twist. Jack took a step closer to her, his gaze softening. "You're not alone. I'm here to get you out of here, princess." The word princess sounded strange coming from him. Zara wasn't used to being called that by someone who wasn't from her world. She had always been treated with respect, but in this moment, she felt small, helpless. She had no idea how Jack planned to get her off the ship, but she was willing to trust him. "What's your plan?" Zara asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "How do we escape?" Jack looked around, making sure the aliens weren't paying attention. He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's an escape pod on this ship. I've been studying their patterns for a while. We can make it if we're quick." Zara felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly replaced by doubt. "But the ship is huge. How can we get past all those guards? There must be hundreds of them." Jack smiled faintly, his eyes gleaming with confidence. "I know. That's why we need to move carefully. I've fought against these kinds of criminals before. They underestimate humans, but they won't see me coming." Zara studied Jack carefully. She could see the determination in his eyes, and for the first time since she had been captured, she began to feel like there was a chance for escape. Maybe he could do it. "All right," she said, taking a deep breath. "Let's do it." Jack motioned for her to follow him. The two aliens who had been standing by the door didn't seem to notice them at first. Jack's movements were quick and quiet as he led Zara through the dark corridors of the ship. He moved like someone who had done this many times before, and Zara felt herself relax, just a little. They passed several rooms, all locked with heavy metal doors. Some were full of alien equipment, others looked like holding cells. Each time they passed one, Zara's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know if she was about to be caught or if they were safe, but Jack seemed calm. He knew what he was doing. Finally, they reached a small, dark hallway at the back of the ship. Jack stopped and motioned for Zara to be quiet. He peered around the corner. After a few seconds, he nodded and waved her forward. "We're almost there," he whispered. Zara's heart raced as they continued. She had no idea where they were going, but she trusted Jack. He had kept his word so far, and he didn't seem like someone who would give up easily. They arrived at a small door at the end of the hallway. Jack pulled out a device from his pocket, quickly tapping on it. The door clicked open. Inside, Zara saw a small pod, just big enough for 2 people. It was their only way out. Jack turned to Zara, his face serious. "This is it. We have to leave now." Zara stepped forward, but a thought crossed her mind. What about the aliens? They'll notice we're gone. Jack's lips pressed together, his eyes narrowing. "We don't have much time. The ship will be busy, and they'll be looking for us. But we'll make it. Trust me." Zara nodded, her heart pounding. She had no choice but to trust him. She had to. This was her chance for freedom. The 2 of them quickly climbed into the escape pod. Jack worked quickly, pressing buttons on the control panel. Zara sat still, trying to calm her nerves. They had come this far, and now they were so close. Suddenly, the pod shuddered as it began to detach from the ship. Zara's breath caught in her throat as she looked out the small window, watching the enemy ship grow smaller and smaller. "Hold on," Jack said, his voice steady. "We're almost clear." As the escape pod shot through space, Zara let herself relax for the first time since her kidnapping. She wasn't out of danger yet, but she was free. She was no longer a prisoner. She was on her way to safety, with Jack by her side. Zara looked at him and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack gave her a small nod. "We're not safe yet, Princess, but we'll get there." And for the first time, Zara believed him. The escape. Zara's heart raced as the escape pod shot through the darkness of space. She looked out the small window, her hands gripping the seat beneath her. The enemy ship, once so large and intimidating, was now growing smaller and smaller as they sped away. Her mind was still spinning. She had been kidnapped, taken far from her home, and now she was escaping with a human she barely knew. It all felt like a dream, but the cold metal walls of the pod and the sound of the engine told her it was real. Beside her, Jack was focused on the control panel, his hands moving quickly over the buttons. His expression was calm, but Zara could see the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't just worried about the ship. They were running out of time. The raiders would notice soon that their princess was gone, and when they did, they would stop at nothing to find her. "Are we safe?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack didn't look at her, but he answered in a steady voice, "Not yet. We have to get far enough away from their ship before they can track us." Zara nodded, but her nerves were getting the best of her. The thought of being hunted again, of being caught and dragged back, made her stomach twist. She had to keep going. She had to trust Jack. He had gotten her this far, and she couldn't give up now. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "What happens when we get away from them?" Jack finally turned to her, his face serious. "We need to find a safe planet, somewhere we can hide and figure out our next move. I don't think they'll follow us once we're far enough out of their reach, but we can't be sure." Zara glanced at the control panel, seeing a series of buttons and screens she didn't understand. She trusted Jack, but she didn't know anything about how to pilot a ship. She was used to being a princess, living a life of luxury and safety. This was new. This was real. As the pod continued its fast journey through space, Zara felt a mixture of fear and hope. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing: she had to be strong. Her people needed her, and she couldn't fail them. She would find her way back. She would return home. Suddenly, a loud beeping sound filled the small pod, and Jack's hands flew over the controls. Zara's breath caught in her throat. "What is it?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. "Trouble," Jack muttered, his eyes scanning the screens. "They're tracking us." Zara's heart sank. She hadn't been free for long, and now they were already being hunted. She looked out the window again, hoping for a miracle, but the blackness of space stretched out before her, endless, cold, and empty. "Can you stop them?" Zara asked, her voice shaking. Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he worked quickly, pressing buttons and pulling levers. The pod shuddered slightly, and Zara felt it tilt as Jack made adjustments. His eyes never left the screen, his focus sharp. "I'm going to try and break their lock on us," Jack said, his voice low and determined. "But it won't be easy. Stay calm." Zara nodded, though her body was tense with fear. She had to trust him. She had to believe that Jack could get them to safety. For a few moments, the pod seemed to be still, but then another beep sounded. This time, it was much louder, more urgent. "They've locked on again," Jack said, his voice tight. "I need to change course. Fast." Zara's hands gripped the armrests, her knuckles white. The cold sweat on her forehead was not from the chill of space, but from the fear of being caught. She glanced at Jack again, watching as his fingers moved quickly, his brow furrowed with concentration. Then, without warning, the pod lurched. Zara's stomach dropped as the ship began to shift, jerking hard to the side. She gasped and held on tightly. The sound of the engine changed, becoming louder, deeper, as Jack increased their speed. "Hang on," Jack shouted, his voice calm but urgent. "This is going to be a bumpy ride." The pod jerked again, harder this time. Zara's body was thrown against the seat, and she gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. But Jack's quick thinking had worked. The ship was veering off course, moving in unexpected ways that would make it harder for the enemy to track. For what felt like an eternity, the ship raced through space, twisting and turning, dodging invisible dangers. Zara's mind was spinning. She had no idea where they were going or what would happen next, but she trusted Jack. She had to. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the jerking stopped. The pod leveled out, and the engine noise settled into a steady hum. Zara breathed a sigh of relief, but the tension in her chest didn't fully disappear. Jack turned to her, a tired but relieved expression on his face. "We lost them," he said quietly. Zara felt a wave of relief wash over her. They were safe. For now. But as the silence stretched between them, she realized something else. They had escaped the raiders, but they were still far from home. They didn't know where they were going or what lay ahead. And yet, Zara knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. Jack had kept his promise. He had saved her. And now, together, they had to figure out what came next. Hiding on a new planet, the escape pod descended through the atmosphere of a strange new planet, its exterior shaking as it hit the thicker layers of air. Zara gripped the seat tightly, her eyes wide as she peered out of the small window. The world below was unlike anything she had seen before. The landscape was filled with rolling hills, vast fields of tall grass, and large, dark trees that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. It was quiet here, almost too quiet. Jack was focused on the controls, his face tense as he maneuvered the pod closer to the surface. Zara could feel the weight of their situation bearing down on her. They had escaped the alien raiders, but they were far from safe. This new planet could hold dangers of its own, and they had no idea what they would find. "We're almost there," Jack said, his voice calm but with an edge of urgency. "Just hold on." Zara nodded, her hands still clenched around the armrests. She had never been this far from home before, and the thought of being stranded on an unfamiliar world made her stomach churn. But there was no turning back. She had made a choice to trust Jack, and now she had to see it through. The pod finally touched down with a soft thud, the engines powering down with a low hum. Zara let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. "We're safe for now," Jack said, glancing over at her with a reassuring smile. "Let's take a look outside." Zara hesitated for a moment, then unbuckled her seatbelt and followed Jack to the exit. He opened the hatch slowly, and the cool, fresh air of the planet rushed inside, carrying with it the scent of earth and grass. Zara stepped out cautiously, her bare feet touching the soft soil beneath her. She looked around, taking in the peaceful surroundings. The sky above was a soft shade of purple, with two suns hanging low on the horizon, casting an orange glow over the landscape. It was beautiful, but Zara couldn't let her guard down. They were on the run, and they had to stay hidden. "This place looks safe enough," Jack said, glancing around. "But we can't stay here long. We need to find shelter." Zara nodded. "Do you know where to go?" Jack gave her a small grin. "I'm going to find us a place to hide. Stay close to me." They moved cautiously through the tall grass, stepping quietly as Jack led the way. Zara stayed close behind him, her eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. The further they walked, the more she realized how strange this planet was. The trees were unlike anything she had seen before, with thick, twisted trunks and leaves that glowed faintly in the dimming light. After a short walk, they reached a small hill, and Jack paused. "We'll stay here for the night," he said. "There's a cave just ahead. We can rest and plan our next move." Zara nodded, grateful for the moment of rest. She had never been so tired in her life. Her muscles ached from the long escape, and her mind was still reeling from everything that had happened. She glanced over at Jack, wondering what had driven him to help her. He wasn't like the others. He didn't seem to want anything from her. He was simply kind. They made their way to the cave, and Jack entered first, checking the space for any signs of danger. Once he gave the all-clear, Zara stepped inside. It was small but cozy, with enough room for them to settle in for the night. The walls of the cave were smooth, and the air inside was cool and dry. "We should be safe here for a while," Jack said, sitting down on a flat rock. "The raiders won't find us so easily." Zara sat across from him, still processing everything that had happened. She had been a princess, living a life of luxury and protection. And now, here she was, hiding on a strange planet with a human she barely knew. It was a lot to take in, but one thing was clear: Jack was her only hope. Without him, she would still be on that ship, heading to who knows where. "Jack," Zara said, her voice soft. "Why did you help me?" Jack looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he shrugged. "I don't know. I couldn't just let them take you. You didn't deserve that." Zara felt a small warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Jack gave her a faint smile. "You would have found a way. You're stronger than you think." Zara didn't reply. She wasn't sure about that. But for now, she had to believe him. He had given her a second chance at life, and she couldn't waste it. The night passed slowly. Zara lay on the cold stone floor, staring at the ceiling of the cave. She couldn't sleep, her thoughts racing. What would happen next? How long would they have to hide here? And would the raiders ever stop looking for her? But despite all the questions, one thing was clear: she wasn't alone anymore. Jack was there. And as long as he was, she felt a little safer. The threat returns. The night was still, but Zara couldn't sleep. She lay on the cold stone floor of the cave, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Every sound seemed too loud. The soft rustling of the trees outside, the faint wind blowing through the grass. Everything felt like a warning. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Jack had fallen asleep, resting on a rock not far from her. His breathing was slow and steady, but even in his sleep, Zara could see the tension in his body. He was always on edge, always watching, always listening for danger. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. It was distant at first, barely noticeable, but then it grew louder. Heavy footsteps, crunching through the grass outside. Zara sat up quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, every fiber of her being screamed that something was coming. Jack's eyes shot open at the same moment. He stood up, his hand going to the weapon at his side, his movements quick and quiet. Zara stood too, her legs shaky as she moved to his side. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack's eyes narrowed, his ears straining to catch the sound. "Trouble," he muttered. "Stay close." Zara nodded, her heart hammering. She wanted to ask more questions, but she knew it would be useless. Jack had always been the one with answers, and right now he was focused on keeping them both alive. The footsteps grew louder, closer now, but they didn't sound like one set of footsteps. Zara could hear more, at least 3, maybe 4. "They're here," Jack said under his breath. "We have to move. Now." He moved toward the back of the cave, signaling for Zara to follow. Zara's legs felt like lead as she followed him, every step heavy with fear. She had thought they were safe. She had believed that they could rest, that they had finally found a moment of peace. But the raiders had found them. And now, they had to run again. The footsteps outside stopped for a moment, and Zara held her breath. Had they passed? Had they not noticed the cave? But then the sound of voices drifted through the air, harsh and angry. "They must be close," Jack said, his voice tight. "We're going to need a distraction." Zara's mind raced. A distraction? How could they possibly make one? She glanced around the cave, looking for anything they could use. Her eyes landed on a pile of rocks near the entrance, small enough to move, but heavy enough to make a noise if they fell. "I can do it," Zara said, her voice trembling. "I'll throw the rocks." Jack nodded quickly. "Good, but you have to make it count. Once they're distracted, we need to move fast." Zara's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she could do it, but she didn't have a choice. The sound of the raiders' voices was growing louder, closer. They were almost at the entrance. Zara moved quickly to the pile of rocks, her hands shaking as she picked up a few small stones. She had to be quiet. She had to do this right. With one final breath, she tossed the rocks toward the mouth of the cave, sending them tumbling across the stone floor. The sound echoed in the stillness of the night. The raiders outside froze. "What was that?" one of them asked, his voice low. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed Zora's arm and pulled her toward the back of the cave. "Move," he whispered urgently. Zara's heart was in her throat as they scrambled to the farthest corner of the cave. She could hear the raiders outside, their voices growing louder, searching for the source of the noise. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying that they wouldn't find them. She had never felt so vulnerable in her life. This wasn't a palace or a place of safety. It was a cave, and it was their only hope. The voices of the raiders grew clearer, the sound of their boots crunching on the dirt outside making Zara's heart race. She could hear them talking to each other, their words unclear, but there was no mistaking their intent. They were getting closer. "They're not far," one of them said. "I know they're here somewhere." Zara clutched Jack's arm tightly, her nails digging into his skin. Her breath was shallow, each one a struggle to keep quiet. She could hear the tension in Jack's breathing too. He was ready to move, but they needed the right moment. They needed to get out of here before it was too late. A loud thud came from the entrance of the cave. Zora's eyes snapped open, and she saw Jack tense, his hand gripping his weapon. The raiders were too close. They couldn't wait any longer. "Now," Jack hissed. Without thinking, Zara followed Jack's lead as he dashed toward the back of the cave. They crouched low, moving silently through the darkness, staying close to the walls to avoid being seen. Zara's heart raced, but she kept her eyes focused on the path ahead. They had to get out. They had to survive. The raiders' voices were closer now, and Zara could feel the heat of their presence just outside the cave. She held her breath, praying they wouldn't notice the two of them slipping away. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Jack reached the back of the cave. He pushed aside a thick curtain of vines and led Zara through a narrow opening. They were outside. They were free. For now. They didn't stop. They ran through the thick grass, Jack leading the way with Zara close behind. The raiders had come for them, but they weren't going to catch them. Not yet. Zara glanced back one last time, the cave fading into the distance behind them. The threat had returned, but so had their fight for survival. Confession of love. The stars above twinkled brightly in the night sky, casting a soft glow over the quiet landscape. Zara sat on the edge of a small hill, staring out into the vastness of the unknown planet. The cool breeze ruffled her hair, and for the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. They had outrun the raiders once again, and now, for a brief moment, there was no danger. No threats, just silence. Jack sat next to her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He had been quiet for a while, and Zara couldn't help but notice the way his jaw was clenched, the worry in his eyes. She knew he was always thinking, always on alert, but tonight he seemed different, tired, lost, even. Zara hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Jack, why do you keep helping me?" He turned to look at her, surprised by the question. But then his expression softened, and he gave a small sigh. "Because I promised," he said quietly. "I promised you I would keep you safe." "But it's more than that, isn't it?" Zara pressed gently. "You've risked everything for me. Your life, your safety. Why?" Jack didn't answer immediately. He looked away, his eyes lost in the distance as if searching for something. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's because I—" He trailed off, then took a deep breath. "I never expected to care for anyone like this." Zara felt her heart skip a beat. She looked at him, her eyes wide. "Care for me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jack turned to face her, his eyes dark and intense. "Yes, Zara. I care about you more than I should. I never planned for this, but it happened. I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone." Zara's mind raced. She had been so focused on survival, so caught up in the dangers they faced, that she hadn't even thought about what had been growing between them. She had felt it too, that pull, that connection. But hearing Jack say it out loud made it all too real. She didn't know how to respond. Jack seemed to sense her uncertainty. "I know it's complicated," he continued. "You're a princess, and I'm just a soldier. You have a life, a future, a world I can't even imagine. But none of that matters to me anymore. What matters is right here, right now. You." Zara's heart swelled with emotions she couldn't quite name. She had never thought that someone like Jack, a human soldier, could care for someone like her. She was an alien princess, a creature of a different world. And yet here she was, sitting beside him, hearing the words she had never expected to hear. "I don't know what to say," Zara whispered, her voice soft and unsure. Jack gave her a small smile. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know how I feel." Zara swallowed hard, trying to process everything. She could feel the warmth in her chest, the fluttering sensation of something new, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. She had been too focused on survival, too focused on escaping the raiders and the danger that followed her everywhere. But now, in this quiet moment, she allowed herself to feel something else. "I care about you too, Jack," Zara finally admitted, her voice quiet but sure. "I didn't know it at first. I didn't understand. But you've been there for me, every step of the way. You've protected me, cared for me. I've never had anyone do that before." Jack's eyes softened, his expression filled with something deeper than gratitude, something that made Zora's heart beat faster. "I'll always protect you, Zara. As long as I can, I'll always be here for you." Zara looked up at the stars, her thoughts swirling. The world she knew was far behind her, and she was now on a new planet, surrounded by unknown dangers. But for the first time since the raiders had taken her, she didn't feel so alone. Jack was with her. He cared for her, and she cared for him. That thought, simple as it was, made everything seem a little more bearable. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with understanding and quiet affection. They didn't need to say much more. The bond they shared was already strong, unspoken but undeniable. After a long moment, Zara turned to Jack, her eyes soft. "What happens now?" she asked. "Where do we go from here?" Jack smiled at her, his hand reaching out to gently take hers. "I don't know what the future holds, Zara, but we'll face it together. Whatever happens, we face it together." Zara squeezed his hand, the weight of his words sinking deep into her heart. She had once been a princess, surrounded by power and luxury. But now she felt like a person. A woman who had found something she never expected, someone who cared for her, someone she could trust with her life. As they sat together, looking out at the stars, Zara knew that their journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more dangers to face. But in that moment, with Jack by her side, she felt ready for whatever came next. And for the first time since everything had changed, Zara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. A new future together. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Zara woke up to the soft warmth of the sun on her face. She blinked, still adjusting to the new day. For a moment, she just lay there, listening to the sounds of the planet around her. Birds chirped in the trees, and the wind whispered through the tall grass. It was peaceful, something she hadn't known in a long time. Beside her, Jack was still asleep. His chest rose and fell slowly with each breath. His face relaxed for the first time in days. The weight of their struggles, the danger they had faced, seemed to fall away in the quiet of this new place. But Zara knew that their peace wouldn't last forever. There was always another threat, always something to fear. Yet with Jack beside her, Zara felt different. She felt strong. She felt like she could face whatever came their way. Slowly, she sat up, brushing her long hair out of her face. She looked down at Jack, smiling softly. He had been her protector, her savior, and now he was something more. He was the person she trusted with her life, the one who had stood by her through everything. And now, he was the person she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. She stood up quietly, careful not to wake him, and walked to the edge of the small camp they had made. The planet was beautiful, its green fields stretching out as far as the eye could see. But there was something else in Zara's heart today, something that wasn't about the planet, the danger, or the past. It was about the future, a future with Jack. She thought back to all the things that had brought her to this moment. The kidnapping, the escape, the hiding, the constant running. She had been a princess, surrounded by luxury and power, but none of that had ever made her feel alive. None of it had ever made her feel like she belonged. It wasn't until she had met Jack, until he had fought for her, protected her, that she had realized what truly mattered. Her thoughts were interrupted as Jack stirred, his eyes opening slowly. He smiled when he saw her standing by the edge of the camp, watching him with those warm, deep eyes. The kind of eyes that made Zara feel safe, no matter what was happening around them. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep but still full of affection. Zara smiled back. "Good morning." He stretched, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Zara hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should speak the words out loud, but she knew it was time. Time to face the truth, time to say what they both already knew. "I've been thinking about our future," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I've been thinking about what happens next. About us." Jack's expression softened, and he stood up, walking over to her. He reached out and gently took her hand in his. "What do you mean?" Zara took a deep breath. "I don't know what the future holds for us. I don't know what will happen tomorrow or the day after. But I do know this. I want to be with you, Jack. I want us to face the future together." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected those words, but now that he heard them, they filled him with a warmth that he couldn't describe. His hand tightened around hers as he pulled her closer. "I feel the same way," he said quietly. "I want to be with you too, Zara. I don't know what the future holds either, but as long as we're together, I think we can handle anything." Zara smiled, her heart light with joy. For the first time in what felt like forever, She felt a sense of hope. A hope that no matter what dangers they might face, they could face them together. A hope that they could build a life, a real life, where love wasn't just a fleeting moment, but something they could hold on to, something that would grow. "I don't want to run anymore," Zara said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "I don't want to hide. I want to build something real. A home, a life. With you." Jack's eyes sparkled as he nodded. "I want that too. A home with you. No more hiding. No more fear." Zara felt a rush of emotion. She had been afraid before, afraid of losing everything. But now, with Jack beside her, she felt like she could take on the world. They had both been through so much, but they had made it through. They were still standing, still together. That was enough. "I think we can do it," Zara said, her voice full of hope. "We can build a new life here. We can make this planet our home. And we can be free." Jack smiled, his eyes full of admiration. "We can. Together." For a long moment, they stood there, hand in hand, looking out over the planet. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they would face it together. They had already been through the worst, and now they were ready to move forward, ready to build something beautiful. "We'll make it work," Jack said, his voice full of confidence. Zara nodded, her heart filled with love for the man who had become her everything. "Yes, together, we will." As the sun rose higher in the sky, Zara and Jack stood side by side, ready for the future. They didn't know what would happen next, but they knew one thing for sure: they had each other. And that was all they needed to face whatever came their way.